Marcus Hale didn't plan to come home early. He had a flight to catch, meetings in Dubai, a schedule that hadn't changed in 6 years. But somewhere between the airport and the gate, something made him turn around. He couldn't explain it. He just knew. Now his key was in the door of his own mansion. His tailored suit still sharp, his jaw still set. A man who had built 4 companies from nothing, a man who had never once second-guessed a decision in his life. He stepped inside. And stopped. The chandelier was dimmed. The garland on the staircase glowed soft and gold. The Christmas tree stood perfect in the corner. But the house felt wrong. Not messy, not broken. Just asterisk wrong. The way a room feels when someone has been careful not to leave a trace. Then he heard it, voices, low, coming from the east wing. He took 1 step toward them. A hand pressed flat across his mouth. Small, firm, certain. He spun fast, ready to react, and froze completely. It was Alina, his grandmother, 79 years old, standing in the shadow of her own grandson's hallway, gray hair neat, eyes sharp and steady, her other hand gripping his shoulder like she had rehearsed this exact moment. She leaned close to his ear. "Stay quiet." Her voice wasn't shaking. It wasn't frightened. It was the voice of a woman who already knew everything and had been waiting for him to finally walk through that door. If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow. And while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. All right, let's get back into it. Because what Marcus didn't know yet, what would shatter everything he thought he understood about his own life, was that his grandmother hadn't been standing in that hallway by accident. She had been standing there for 6 weeks, waiting for the night she'd finally need to save him. Marcus didn't move. He stood in the entrance of his own home, Alina's hand still pressed against his shoulder, and he listened. Voices. Coming from the east wing. He turned his head slowly. His eyes moved down the long hallway toward the boardroom, the room he used for private meetings, for deals that never left those walls, for conversations that cost millions. At 9 p.m. on New Year's Eve, when every single person on his staff had been given the night off. He recognized the first voice immediately. Victor. That laugh, low, relaxed, the laugh of a man who believed he was completely safe, floated through the corridor like it belonged there. Like he belonged there. Then a second voice, clipped, precise. His CFO, Daniel Marsh. Marcus's jaw tightened. He took 1 step toward the sound. Alina's grip on his shoulder turned to iron. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her eyes cut sideways, sharp and deliberate, pointing down the opposite corridor, away from the voices, away from the boardroom. Come now. Marcus looked at her, then back toward the east wing, then at her again. Something in her face stopped him cold. It wasn't panic. Alina had never panicked once in her life. This was something else entirely. This was the expression of a woman who had already thought through every version of this night and knew exactly which one ended badly. He followed her. She moved through the mansion without hesitation. No stumbling in the dark, no pausing at corners. She took the side corridor, then the narrow passage beside the kitchen, then the back stairwell that most of the household staff didn't even know existed. She had walked this route before. More than once. Marcus stayed close, his footsteps silent on the polished floor, his mind turning fast and cold. He was a man who understood systems, who could walk into a boardroom and read the entire room in 30 seconds, who had built an empire by noticing what other people missed. And right now, every instinct he had was screaming the same thing. This was not a coincidence. Victor and Daniel weren't here because of a last-minute meeting. They weren't here because of a deal, or a deadline, or some emergency that couldn't wait. They were here because they believed Marcus was 30,000 feet in the air, somewhere over the Atlantic, completely unreachable. They were here because tonight was supposed to be safe. Alina stopped at the door to her private sitting room. She pressed it open quietly, guided him inside, and closed it behind them without a sound. Then she turned to face him. And for the first time, Marcus saw it, the weight she had been carrying. The careful, exhausted look of someone who had been holding a terrible secret completely alone. "Sit down," she said softly. "Gran." "Marcus," her voice was gentle but final. "Sit down, there are things I need to show you." The sitting room was small and warm. A single lamp glowed in the corner. A half-finished cup of tea sat on the side table. Everything in the room was neat, considered, exactly the way Alina kept every space she occupied. Marcus sat on the edge of the small settee, still in his suit, still coiled tight with tension he didn't know how to release. Alina moved to the wardrobe. She reached to the top shelf, past folded blankets and a stack of old letters, and pulled down a tin. A biscuit tin, old and dented, painted with faded Christmas holly around the edges. She placed it in his hands without a word. He looked at her. She nodded once. He opened it. It wasn't biscuits. Inside, folded carefully and stacked in neat sections, was paper, printed emails, handwritten notes, columns of numbers with dates beside them, a torn sticky note with 4 names written in Alina's careful script, a circle drawn around each one. He picked up the first printed sheet. A wire transfer, internal, dated 6 weeks ago, an amount large enough to make his eyes stop moving for a moment. He picked up another, a log, handwritten, dates down the left side. Times, notes like asterisk, black car, no plates, east entrance, 11:40 p.m. asterisk and DM arrived, stayed 2 hours, left before staff morning shift. DM. Daniel Marsh. Marcus set the papers down slowly, then picked them up again. He couldn't decide which felt more unreal, the documents in his hands or the woman sitting quietly across from him who had gathered all of it. "Gran," his voice came out lower than he intended. "Where did you get all of this?" "I paid attention," she said simply. "That's all." She explained it quietly, without drama, the way she explained everything. She had started noticing small things in November. A car she didn't recognize arriving late at night. Staff members she'd never seen before, given access by someone she was never introduced to. Numbers on a printed invoice left in the recycling, numbers that didn't match anything she recognized from Marcus's usual operations. So she started writing things down. She asked the housekeeper questions, casually, over morning coffee. She listened when people forgot she was in the room, which, she said, happened more than Marcus would probably expect. "I didn't know how to tell you," she said. "I wasn't sure you'd listen." The words hit him quietly. He opened his mouth to argue, and then closed it. Because the honest answer, the one that sat heavy and still in the center of his chest, was that she was right. If she had come to him 6 weeks ago with a biscuit tin full of handwritten notes and printed emails, he would have smiled at her, told her not to worry, called it a misunderstanding, and gone back to his next meeting. He would have patted her hand and walked away. And that realization, more than the documents, more than the voices in the East Wing, was the thing that made his blood run cold. Marcus was still holding the papers when they heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, unhurried, moving down the corridor outside Alina's door. 2 sets. Alina was out of her chair before Marcus could react. She pressed one hand flat against his chest, sit still, and clicked off the lamp with her other hand. The room dropped into darkness. Neither of them breathed. The footsteps slowed, then stopped, right outside the door. Marcus felt every muscle in his body go rigid. The papers in his hands suddenly felt enormous, like they were somehow visible through the wood, through the dark, through everything. Then a voice. "Victor. The complaint files at 12:01. Easy, relaxed, the voice of a man ending a good week. By the time anyone picks it up, the offshore accounts are already clean. Nothing traces back." A second voice, Daniel. "And the board vote." Locked at 11. Whitmore confirmed this afternoon. A pause. The sound of something, a glass, maybe being turned in a hand. It's done, Daniel. It was done a week ago. We're just waiting for the clock now. Marcus stared at the door. He couldn't see Alina in the dark, but he could feel her, still, controlled, a hand resting lightly on his arm, keeping him anchored. What about the fraud trail? Daniel asked. Airtight? Victor's voice carried something warm in it now, satisfaction. Every document points directly to him, the transfers, the shell accounts, the signatures, all of it. By morning, that's all anyone will see. A short laugh, low and private. He thinks he's landing in Dubai in 4 hours. He has no idea he's already gone. The footsteps started again. Moving away now, back down the corridor. The voices fatting, relaxed and unhurried, the sound of 2 men walking toward a finish line they believed was already theirs. Then silence. Alina clicked the lamp back on. Marcus hadn't moved. He was still sitting exactly where he had been, papers in both hands, eyes fixed on nothing. For a long moment he didn't speak. He was a man who built companies by understanding problems quickly, by stripping out the noise and seeing the structure underneath. It was the thing he was best at in the world. And right now, the structure was perfectly clear. The federal complaint was written, filed and timed, set to detonate the moment midnight passed. The offshore transfers were complete and clean. The board vote was already decided. The fraud trail had his name threaded through every layer of it. They hadn't left a gap, hadn't made a mistake. They hadn't needed to. Because the entire plan had been built around one assumption, that Marcus Hale would be exactly where he always was on New Year's Eve. 30,000 feet in the air. Unreachable. Absent from his own life, the way he always was. He set the papers down on the settee beside him, very carefully, and looked at his grandmother. How much time do we have? He asked. Alina glanced at the small clock on her shelf. 2 hours and 51 minutes, she said quietly. Marcus moved fast. He pulled his phone from his jacket pocket and opened his contacts. His head of security, a man named Cole, a man he had paid very well for exactly this kind of moment, was the first call he made. It rang twice. Then a voicemail picked up. A voice he didn't recognize, a generic recorded message. No name, no company, nothing. He pulled the phone away and stared at it. He called again. Same voicemail. He scrolled down. His personal attorney. A man who had worked for him for 11 years, who answered his calls at midnight without complaint, who had his own dedicated line for Marcus and Marcus alone. It rang 4 times. A woman answered, young, professional, an assistant's voice. Good evening, you've reached the office of... Marcus hung up. He sat very still. Then he went through the rest of them, one by one, with the focused calm of a man trying not to accept what he was already beginning to understand. His private driver, his head of legal, the direct line to his second in command. Each call landed somewhere wrong, an unfamiliar voicemail, a redirect, a number that simply rang out into silence. His digital fortress, the network of private lines and secured contacts he had spent years building, the system that was supposed to make him unreachable to the world and untouchable by anyone who wished him harm, had been taken apart quietly, from the inside, while he wasn't paying attention. They hadn't broken through his walls. They had simply removed them, one brick at a time, over months. He lowered the phone to his knee. The sitting room was very quiet. The lamp cast a small, warm circle of light that suddenly felt fragile against everything outside it. Marcus Hale had started with nothing once before, a rented desk, a second-hand suit, a stubbornness that people had called foolish right up until the moment it made him rich. He had clawed his way out of nothing through sheer force of will. But that was 30 years ago. And this was different. This wasn't a starting line. This was a trap, sealed at every exit, with his name already signed to the charges and the clock running toward midnight. He had no allies, no resources, no time. He had nothing. Eleanor appeared beside him. She set a cup of tea on the small table at his elbow, then settled into her chair across from him, folding her hands in her lap with the quiet patience of someone who had lived through hard things before. She looked at him for a moment. "Now you understand," she said softly, "what most people feel every single day." He didn't answer, because there was no answer to give. He picked up the tea with both hands, just to have something to hold on to, and stared at the floor and tried to think. Somewhere in this city, Victor Crane was celebrating. And Marcus had no one left to call. Or so he thought. Eleanor stood up. She crossed to the small table beside her bed and opened the drawer. From beneath a folded handkerchief and a paperback book with a cracked spine, she pulled out a phone. Not her usual phone. Not the one Marcus had bought her 2 birthdays ago, the one connected to the household Wi-Fi and the shared family plan. This one was older, smaller, a basic model with a worn case and a screen that had never been updated. It looked like something bought quietly, paid for in cash, connected to nothing that mattered. She sat back down and turned it on. Marcus watched her without speaking. She scrolled slowly through her contacts. There weren't many, and stopped on a name near the bottom of the list. Raymond Osei. She turned the phone so Marcus could see the screen. He leaned forward and read it. Beneath the name, 2 words in the notes field. He knows. Marcus looked up at her. "Who is Raymond Osei?" he asked. Eleanor set the phone in her lap and smoothed her hands over her cardigan the way she always did before she told a story that mattered. 30 years ago, she said, someone inside your grandfather's supplier network started moving money, forging invoices, blaming the losses on your grandfather's accounts. She paused. It nearly took everything we had, the business, the house, all of it. Marcus hadn't heard this story, or if he had been too young to hold on to it. Raymond was the investigator assigned to the case, Eleanor continued. He didn't have to work as hard as he did. It was a small case, a small business, nobody important. Her voice stayed even. But he stayed late. He made the calls. He found the truth before the bank could finalize the seizure. She looked at her hands. He saved your grandfather's life's work, and he never asked for anything in return. The room was very quiet. I called him 3 days ago, Eleanor said, when I was certain enough about what I had found. She glanced up. He's been waiting. Marcus stared at her. 3 days ago. While Victor was celebrating in the East Wing. While Daniel Marsh was filing paperwork designed to destroy a man who had no idea it was coming. While every layer of Marcus's professional network was quietly being dismantled. His 79-year-old grandmother had already made her move. He didn't speak for a long moment. He was a man who respected strategy above almost everything. Who could recognize a well-constructed plan the way a musician recognizes a chord, instinctively, immediately, with a kind of involuntary admiration. And what Eleanor had done, alone, without resources, without anyone to consult, was the most careful, most precise piece of strategy he had ever witnessed. She hadn't panicked. She hadn't guessed. She had prepared. "Gran," he said finally. His voice came out differently than he intended. Quieter. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" She looked at him with those steady, knowing eyes. "Because 3 days ago," she said simply, "I finally had enough to make it worth your time." She picked up the phone and pressed call. It rang once. A man answered immediately. "Eleanor," the voice was calm and deep and wide awake. "Is he with you?" "He's with me," she said. "Good," Raymond said. "Then let's get started. We don't have much time." Raymond's voice was steady and clear through the small phone speaker. He had reviewed everything Eleanor sent him 3 days ago. The printed emails, the transfer logs, the 4 circled names. He had spent those 3 days making quiet calls to people he trusted, former colleagues, off-record contacts, a federal attorney he had worked beside for 15 years. It was enough to open a case, but not enough to stop a filing. "The documents Eleanor has are strong," Raymond said, "but on their own, a defense attorney dismantles them in 40 minutes. Printed emails, handwritten logs. Victor's team calls it circumstantial. They call it an old woman's misunderstanding. A pause. I need the server data. Marcus already knew what he meant. In the locked sublevel beneath the mansion, a room that appeared on no building plan, that only 2 people in the world knew existed, sat a private backup server. It ran continuously, silently, storing encrypted records of every internal communication, every transfer authorization, every document that had ever passed through Marcus's network. He had built it 3 years ago, not because he expected betrayal, because he understood that information was the only currency that never lost its value. Right now, that server was the only thing that could save him. How long do you need? Raymond asked. 10 minutes, Marcus said, maybe less. You have 8. After that, I can't control the timing on my end. Marcus handed the phone back to Alina and stood up. She was already on her feet. She picked up the biscuit tin from the shelf, the same one she had emptied of documents, now holding the spare shortbread she kept for guests, and looked at Marcus with complete calm. Give me 30 seconds, she said, then move. He wanted to tell her no. Every instinct, he had resisted the idea of sending a 79-year-old woman into a room full of people dismantling his life. He opened his mouth. She was already out the door. He counted the seconds in the dark of the corridor. Then he heard her. Her voice carried down the hallway, warm, slightly apologetic, entirely convincing. The voice of a sweet, elderly woman who simply couldn't sleep and felt terrible for interrupting. I'm so sorry to bother you all. I heard voices and thought I'd bring something through. Would anyone like a biscuit? I've got shortbread. A beat of silence from the lounge. Then Victor's voice, carefully smoothed into politeness. That's very kind, Alina, thank you. Marcus moved. He kept low and close to the wall, following the route he had mapped in his mind from Alina's room. The back corridor, the maintenance stairs, the sublevel door behind the utility panel. His hands were steady, his mind was not. He could hear the murmur of Alina's voice above him, floating down through the ceiling, cheerful, unhurried, asking someone if they preferred tea, buying him seconds, one polite sentence at a time. He reached the server room. His fingers found the panel, the lock disengaged. He stepped inside, pulled the backup drive from its housing, and pressed it into his jacket pocket. Then he stood completely still and listened for his grandmother's voice. It was still going, steady as a heartbeat. He made it back to Alina's sitting room in 4 minutes. She was already there. The biscuit tin was back on the shelf. She was seated in her chair with her hands folded and her expression unreadable, the way it always was after she had done something difficult without letting it show. She looked at his jacket pocket. He nodded once. She exhaled, small, controlled, and reached for the phone to update Raymond. Marcus sat down and opened his laptop. It was the one he always carried in his bag, the one that ran on its own encrypted system, untouched by anything Victor's team had rerouted. He connected the drive. The files loaded quickly. There was more than he expected. Transfer authorizations with his signature, forged, but clean enough to hold up at a first glance. Internal memos routed through his accounts. A chain of communications between Daniel and 2 board members that stretched back 11 months. 11 months. Marcus read through them with the focused stillness of a man who had trained himself never to react until he fully understood something. He cataloged each file, noted the dates, followed the structure of what they had built. It was meticulous work, patient, deeply considered. Victor had always been meticulous. Then he reached the last folder. It was labeled with a date, 8 months ago. The file inside was a video, short, low angle, captured automatically by the motion sensor camera built into the office bookcase. A system so routine that Marcus had forgotten it existed. Victor hadn't known about it at all. Marcus pressed play. The footage was clear enough. His own office, his own desk in the background, the framed photograph of his mother still visible on the shelf behind it. And Victor, standing with his back half turned to the camera, phone to his ear, speaking to someone Marcus couldn't see. His voice was relaxed, almost fond. He was always the face, never the mind. That was the arrangement from the beginning, he just didn't know it. A pause, a short laugh. After tonight, the world will finally know that. Marcus stopped the video. He sat without moving for a long moment. He had known, somewhere in the last 2 hours, that this was a betrayal. He had understood it factually, structurally, the way he understood most things. A plan, a conspiracy, a carefully constructed attack. But this was something else. This was Victor's voice saying out loud, casually, privately, to someone else entirely, what he had believed about Marcus for years, maybe always. Not a partner who turned, not a friend who broke under pressure or greed. A man who had decided, long ago, that Marcus was a prop in someone else's story. And had stayed, had laughed at his table, had stood at his mother's funeral, had been the first call after the first million. While believing this, quietly, the whole time, Marcus closed the laptop. He didn't feel rage. He had expected rage, and it hadn't come. What settled over him instead was something heavier and older. Grief. Not for the money, not for the empire or the shares or the name that would be dragged through the news by morning. For 14 years. For every handshake and late night and moment, he had believed he was building something with someone who saw him. Aline's hand came to rest on his arm. She didn't say anything. The clock on her shelf read 10:47 p.m. 73 minutes to midnight. Marcus looked at the drive in his hand, then at the clock, then at his grandmother. "Send everything to Raymond," he said quietly. His voice was steady. There would be time to grieve later. Raymond moved fast. By 11 p.m., the drive data was in the hands of the federal attorney. Verified, logged, entered into a counterfiling that would land on the same system as Victor's complaint 4 minutes before midnight, sealing it shut before it could open. But Raymond had done one more thing. The New Year's charity gala was being held at the Meridian Ballroom, a venue Marcus had donated to the city's Arts Foundation 18 months ago. His name was on the building's east entrance in brushed steel lettering. 400 guests were inside right now, in black tie and evening gowns, glasses raised, waiting for the countdown. Victor was among them. Marcus had confirmed it himself, quietly, through a contact Raymond trusted. Victor was at table 7, near the front, close to the broadcast cameras that would carry the midnight moment live across 3 local networks. He had chosen his stage carefully. Raymond had simply borrowed it. Marcus sat in Aline's sitting room and watched it happen through a live feed on his laptop. Aline sat beside him, hands folded, saying nothing. At 11:52 p.m., the ballroom screens, 4 large displays positioned around the room for the countdown, flickered. The gala footage cut out. What replaced it was clean and simple, and completely damning. First, the documents, transfer records, forged signatures, the offshore account structure laid out in plain numbers that anyone in that room could follow. A federal case reference number appeared in the top corner, stamped and verified, Raymond's credentials beneath it. Then the audio. Victor's voice, clear through every speaker in the Meridian Ballroom. By the time he lands in Dubai, it's already done. Tonight, we own everything he built. 400 people went completely still. Marcus watched Victor on the live feed. Watched him turn slowly toward the nearest screen with the careful composure of a man who had not yet accepted what was happening. Then the video played. His own face, his own voice, standing in Marcus's office 8 months ago, phone to his ear, relaxed and certain and completely unaware of the camera behind him. He was always the face, never the mind. The ballroom stayed silent for 3 full seconds. Then it collapsed into noise. Victor moved 1 sharp step toward the exit, the instinct of a man who had always known which direction the door was. But Raymond's people were already there. 2 federal agents in plain clothes, credentials out, positioned and patient. They reached him before he reached the door. It was quiet, professional, the kind of arrest that doesn't involve raised voices because it doesn't need to. Victor looked at the screen one last time as they let him out. His own words were still playing. The countdown clock in the corner of the broadcast read 11:59. The new year arrived in 40 seconds. Victor Crane spent it in the back of a federal vehicle. Marcus closed the laptop and sat back. His hands were completely still. The news broke before sunrise. By 6 a.m., the federal filing had been reversed. By noon, the fraudulent documents were publicly identified as forgeries. By the following morning, 48 hours after midnight, Marcus Hale's name had been cleared across every platform that had carried the story. Daniel Marsh had cooperated within hours of his arrest. The 2 board members followed by morning. The case, Raymond said, was the cleanest unraveling he had seen in 30 years. Victor said nothing. Marcus gave one interview. He didn't call his PR team first, didn't review talking points or approve a statement or consult the communications director who handled every public appearance he had ever made. He sat down in a plain chair in a plain room and answered questions in the quiet, unpolished way of a man who had stopped performing. The journalist asked him about the counterfiling, about Raymond, about the evidence. Then she asked who had helped him. Marcus paused. Not for effect, not the practiced pause of a man who had given 1,000 interviews and knew exactly how to use silence. A real pause, the kind that comes when the honest answer costs something. My grandmother, he said. She noticed what I had stopped being able to see. She documented it alone for 6 weeks because she wasn't sure I'd listen. He looked at his hands for a moment. She was right, I wouldn't have. The journalist waited to see if there was more. There wasn't. Elinor watched the interview on the small television in her sitting room. The biscuit tin sat on the table beside her chair, empty now, its contents submitted as evidence, logged and catalogued and entered into a federal record that would outlast all of them. Just a dented tin with faded holly around the edges, returned to her by Raymond with a handwritten note tucked inside. Thank you, Elinor. R. She watched her grandson on the screen, the way he sat, the way he spoke, careful and unguarded in a way she had not seen from him in a very long time. When the interview ended, she switched the television off. She folded her hands in her lap and looked out the window at the New Year's morning. The light was pale and clean. The street below was quiet. No cameras outside, no reporters, no one who needed anything from her. Just the morning, just the light. She sat with it for a while. The knock came 2 hours later. Not a driver at the gate, not an assistant calling ahead. Just a knock at her door. She opened it. Marcus stood alone on her doorstep. No suit today, a simple coat, his hands in his pockets like a man who had nowhere important to be. He looked at her for a moment. I came to have tea, he said quietly. Just tea. Elinor looked at her grandson, really looked at him, and saw something in his face that hadn't been there the night before. She stepped aside to let him in. Thanks for staying with this story right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down.